Okay, so you're trying to really get to the heart of learning, right? Like, you want to understand how people learn best and improve, but you don't want to wade through mountains of information.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what we're going to try to do today. We're diving into the idea of self-regulation and learning.
Right. Self-regulation, it's a big topic. And to guide us, we've got this super interesting research paper from 2006.
Assessment in the Evaluation of Self-Regulation as a Process. That's the title.
Catchy, right?
It is, and it was written by Kaskiller, Bocarts, and Costigan, and published in the Educational Psychology Review.
What really struck me about this paper was it's not just about what self-regulation is like, oh, set goals, stay focused. It's about how we even figure out what's going on inside those brains when people learn.
Like trying to understand a really complex machine, you need the right tools to even see how all the parts work together.
Exactly. So, our mission today is to explore what this research tells us about the challenges of trying to assess self-regulation and what some potential solutions might be.
So by the end of this, you'll have a much better understanding of what's really important when we talk about how people learn and improve.
Okay, well, the paper kicks off by saying assessment isn't just like an afterthought when studying self-regulation. It's absolutely crucial.
Right, it's the foundation. Like we build our understanding, our theories, and how we apply those ideas in real life based on how we assess it.
Okay. So, how do they think about assessment when it comes to self-regulation?
Well, they point out that self-regulation covers so many different things. Like it's not just one thing. It's about setting goals, sure, but it's also about how you monitor your progress, how you adapt when things aren't working, and so much more. And every single one of those things needs a way to be measured, which is where things get kind of tricky.
Which leads us to one of the first big challenges the paper brings up. There are tons of different ways that researchers have tried to understand and assess self-regulation. So it's not like there's one gold standard way to do it, is there?
No, not at all. I mean, you look at the research and you see all these different theoretical models and all these different tools people are using. And this is where the authors bring up some real concerns. They talk about these like serious definitional problems and conceptual overlaps. Basically, what they're saying is that different researchers might be talking about slightly different things when they say self-regulation.
So it's like we're all talking about a car, but some of us are calling the engine a motor, and some people are describing parts that aren't even in a car at all.
Exactly. It's like we're not even speaking the same language sometimes. And then on top of that, the tools people use to measure this stuff are all over the place. You've got self-report questionnaires where learners have to think about their own habits. You've got researchers observing how people actually behave when they're learning. You've got in-depth interviews trying to dig into people's thought processes. And the list just goes on and on.
So much variety.
Yeah. And while all this variety reflects the different things researchers are focusing on, like whether it's the social, cognitive, or volitional side of self-regulation,
Right.
it makes it so hard to make sense of all the findings. If everyone's using different definitions and different tools, how do you compare the results of all these studies?
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like comparing apples and oranges or trying to judge a swimming competition with the rules of basketball.
Uh-huh. Right. And to make things even more complicated, the paper points out that the actual concepts we're trying to grasp can be really fuzzy. And they're often at a level of abstraction that's far removed from what we can actually observe someone doing.
Okay, I'm with you so far, but what do you mean by fuzzy concepts and level of abstraction?
Well, think about something like trying to measure metacognitive awareness, right? That's your ability to think about your own thinking. That's happening all inside your head. It's not something you can see or easily measure directly. So we have to rely on indirect methods, like asking someone to explain their thought processes while solving a problem, which might not be the most accurate representation of what's actually happening in their mind. And another issue the authors bring up is that a lot of these theoretical models don't really prove that the different stages they propose, like the planning stage, the doing stage, and the reflecting stage, are actually distinct and separate processes. If they're all intertwined, it gets much harder to assess them individually and figure out what role each one plays in self-regulated learning.
Wow. Okay, yeah. So the paper dives into something they call the consciousness problem too, which sounds pretty intense.
It is. It's this really interesting challenge for anyone trying to measure self-regulation.
What is the consciousness problem exactly?
Basically, the authors remind us that as learners, we're not always completely aware of all the things that influence our self-regulation. We might make choices about how to learn or what strategies to use, but we don't always consciously know all the reasons why. So if you're asking someone to explain their choices, They might not be able to give you the full picture simply because they don't have access to all those hidden processes happening in their brain.
Ah, so even if you're trying to be honest with yourself, you might not have all the answers.
Right. You might think you know why you procrastinated on that assignment, but there could be all these underlying factors at play that you're not even aware of.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So the paper also talks about this trend toward what they call new modes of assessment that try to be more like real-world learning situations, which sounds cool in theory.
Yeah, it does. But the authors have some important warnings about that approach, too.
Oh, what are they warning about?
Well, their main point is that just trying to make an assessment more like real life doesn't automatically mean you're getting a better or more accurate measure of self-regulation. Sometimes trying to perfectly mimic real life can actually make it harder to interpret the results. You introduce so many different variables and complexities that it becomes super difficult to isolate the specific things about self-regulation that you're trying to measure.
Ah, I see. Like if you're trying to test the aerodynamics of a new airplane wing, you wouldn't do it in the middle of a hurricane. There'd be way too much going on.
Exactly. It would be almost impossible to tell how much of the performance was due to the wind design and how much was due to the crazy storm. And, the paper also talks about this common misconception about standardized tests. People often think they're all just basic multiple choice questions that don't really reflect real world skills.
Oh, yeah. Everyone complains about teaching to the test.
Yeah, I hear that a lot. But the authors are quick to point out that well-designed standardized tests can use much more sophisticated types of questions while still being reliable and valid, which are like the cornerstones of good assessment. And speaking of reliability, the authors really hammer home the point that it's absolutely essential for any assessment, no matter how authentic or real-world it tries to be. If your measurements are inconsistent, then the data you collect is pretty much meaningless. Think of it like a broken scale. If it gives you a different weight every time you step on it, it's useless.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. So, are they saying that standardized tests are the way to go when assessing self-regulation?
Well, not exactly. What they're saying is that the idea of using different assessment methods and picking the best one for the job isn't actually some brand new revolutionary concept. It's always been the best approach. Choose the tool that best fits the specific question you're trying to answer. That's what thoughtful assessment is all about.
Yeah.
Being strategic, not just following the latest trend.
Right. Pick the right tool for the job. Makes sense.
Exactly. Now, zooming out a bit, the paper spends a lot of time talking about the complex nature of self-regulation. They make it clear that it's not just one skill or ability, but a whole interconnected system.
Okay, so unpack that a little bit. Why is self-regulation so complex?
Well, they describe it as being at the intersection of all these different psychological domains. Like you've got cognition, which is all about how our brains process information. You've got motivation, which is what drives us to learn in the first place. Then there's volition, which is our ability to control our impulses and stay focused on a task.
Yeah.
And you can't forget problem solving, decision making, and metacognition, which is our ability to reflect on our own learning process. Because self-regulation is tied in with all of these things, it makes assessing it super challenging.
Oh, wow. That's a lot to try and measure all at once.
Absolutely. It's like a recipe with a ton of ingredients. You need to understand how each ingredient works on its own, but also how they all interact to create the final dish. And the paper actually goes on to describe the key characteristics of what self-regulated learning really looks like.
Ooh, what are some of those characteristics?
Well, first of all, it's multi-component, meaning it involves many different interacting parts. It's also iterative, meaning it's a cyclical process of planning, monitoring, and adjusting your approach. And it's very much self-steering, with the learner taking an active role in guiding their own learning.
It sounds very dynamic, like constantly evolving and changing.
Yes, exactly. And the paper points out that this makes assessment even harder. You're not just measuring a static thing. You're trying to capture this dynamic process as it unfolds. And it's not just about what's happening in the learner's head either. They also talk about the importance of modulating various elements, including environmental factors, cognitive strategies, emotional responses, and behaviors. All of this is aimed at maximizing learning achievement.
Okay, so trying to capture all that in an assessment does sound pretty daunting.
Right. It is. It's like trying to take a single photograph that captures every nuance of a live musical performance. You can't really do it justice. And on top of all that, the paper touches on how our approaches to assessing self-regulated learning, or SRL, have actually changed over time.
Ooh, how have they changed?
Well, early on, researchers tended to think of SRL as a pretty stable trait, like something you either had or you didn't. But more recently, the field has shifted towards a more dynamic perspective.
What do you mean by a dynamic perspective?
Well, it's the understanding that SRL can change depending on the situation. It's not fixed, it's constantly evolving as we learn. And there's also been growing recognition of how important a learner's motivation is, how they use cognitive strategies, and how the learning environment itself can influence their self-regulation.
So it's not just about what's going on inside a learner's head, but also how that interacts with the world around them.
Exactly. So given all this complexity, it's probably no surprise that the paper lays out some serious ongoing challenges in the field of SRL assessment.
I imagine there are quite a few. So what do they highlight as the biggest challenges right now?
Well, a lot of the things we've already discussed, actually, like the fact that there are so many complex theoretical models out there, and they're not always based on solid evidence. Then you've got the overlapping and poorly defined concepts that just create confusion and make it hard to compare research. And there's not enough attention being paid to the reliability and validity of the tools and methods we're using.
Yeah, if the tools aren't accurate and consistent, the whole thing falls apart, right?
Exactly. And then you have researchers jumping on the latest trendy assessment approaches without really thinking about whether they're grounded in solid theory. Like the authors specifically call out these box models of self-regulation.
Box models, what are those?
These are models that present all these neat and tidy stages of self-regulation, like planning, monitoring, and evaluating. But they don't actually prove that these processes are truly separate and independent. They just kind of assume it.
Ah, so they're neat and tidy in theory, but maybe not so much in reality.
Exactly. But the paper doesn't just dwell on the problems. It also offers some really good suggestions for how we can improve assessment practices.
I'm all ears. What kind of suggestions do they make?
First and foremost, they really emphasize the need to be much more careful and rigorous in how we apply basic psychometric principles.
Okay, so psychometric principles for those of us who aren't assessment experts.
It means making sure the tools we use to measure self-regulation are high quality, consistent, and actually measure what we intend them to measure. That's the foundation of any good assessment.
Okay, that makes sense. What else do they suggest?
Well, they also encourage moving away from relying too heavily on simple correlations in research, especially when we're trying to understand the relationships between different parts of self-regulation. Instead, they advocate for using more sophisticated statistical techniques that can really test the specific hypotheses we have about how these things work together. And a key recommendation is to use more process measures.
Process measures, what are those?
It's basically a way of assessing self-regulation as it's happening, in real time, during a learning activity. So instead of just looking at the final outcome, you're trying to track the specific steps, strategies, and decisions a learner makes along the way. And the authors are really excited about the potential of technology to help us collect this kind of rich, real-time data.
So instead of just a snapshot, we get a whole movie of the learning process.
Exactly. And they even talk about the idea of intelligent classrooms.
Intelligent classrooms, that sounds futuristic. What does that even look like?
Imagine a classroom where assessment is seamlessly built into everyday activities, providing ongoing feedback on students' self-regulation. Like maybe there are embedded tasks or anchor items that give students and teachers real-time insights into how those self-regulatory processes are working. So it's not about these big high-stakes tests. It's about making assessment a natural part of the learning process.
That's a cool vision. Assessment as a guide, not a judge.
I know, right? And the authors point out all these potential benefits of this approach. You could have real-time feedback, not just for teachers, but for learners themselves, empowering them to adjust their strategies as they go. You could create these cumulative portfolios of self-regulated learning that show a student's growth over time. And by combining all this data with background information about the learner and their context, you could get a much deeper understanding of the factors that contribute to successful self-regulation. And the authors are particularly excited about the potential of advanced technologies to make all of this possible.
Speaking of advanced technologies, the paper does get pretty deep into things like neural networks and Bayesian estimators, which sound pretty intimidating, to be honest.
Oh yeah, they're powerful tools,
Hmm.
but they're not as scary as they sound once you understand the basic idea. They're all about finding complex patterns and making predictions from tons of data. And the authors believe these technologies have huge potential to help us analyze the really intricate factors that are at play in self-regulation.
Okay, so break it down for me. What are neural networks, and how could they be useful in studying self-regulation?
Well, a neural network is basically a sophisticated computer program that's inspired by how the human brain works. Think of it like a network of interconnected nodes or neurons, and they can learn from data. So you feed in information about a learner, like their past performance, their motivation levels, the strategies they say they use, and the neural network can try to predict things like how successful they'll be at a new learning task. What makes them so powerful is they can handle tons of data and uncover those hidden relationships between different factors that would be really hard to spot with traditional statistical methods.
So they're like super-powered pattern detectors.
Yeah. And then to make sure the neural network is actually doing a good job, researchers use a bunch of different metrics. They look at things like how often the network correctly predicts an outcome, how often it makes mistakes, and all sorts of other measures to evaluate its performance. And with so much data potentially going into a neural network, you have to be careful not to overload it with irrelevant information. That's where item response theory, or IRT, comes in.
Item response theory. Another fancy term. Tell me more.
So IRT is a way of figuring out which pieces of information are most useful for measuring the thing you're interested in this case, self-regulation. So you can use IRT to clean up the data going into the neural network, make it more efficient, and help it focus on the most important signals.
So it's like filtering out noise to get a clearer signal?
Exactly. And when it comes to actually using neural networks to study self-regulation, the paper suggests a couple of different approaches. One idea is to build separate networks for different factors like motivation, cognitive strategies, and metacognition, and then combine their predictions. Another approach is to create one giant neural network that takes in all the relevant variables and learns the complex interactions between them. Either way, they emphasize the need to use techniques like IRT to make the data more manageable. The whole process involves training the network on a big data set and then testing it on a separate data set to see how well it can predict self-regulation in new learners.
So they're basically training these computer programs to become experts in self-regulated learning.
Right. And the output from the network could be something like categorizing learners into different profiles or predicting how well they'll perform on a certain task based on their self-regulation skills.
Wow. It's mind-blowing to think about how much potential these technologies have to really unlock the secrets of self-regulated learning.
I know, right? And the authors are clearly very excited about the future of assessment in this field. They believe that with all these advancements in methodology, especially with the help of technology, we're on the verge of being able to understand and support self-regulated learning in ways we never could before.
So the main takeaway for our listeners is that while understanding and measuring self-regulation is definitely a complex and challenging thing, it's absolutely crucial if we want to help people become better learners. And the future of assessment in this area looks really promising.
Absolutely. And here's a final thought for you to ponder as you go about your day. Given these exciting developments in how we can understand and assess self-regulation, what do you think the future of truly personalized learning could look like? I mean, imagine if we had the ability to really see those inner workings of the mind, track how those cognitive and motivational processes are working in real time, and then tailor educational experiences to support each individual learner in the best possible way. That's a future I'm really excited to see unfold.
Me too. I mean, that would be a game changer for education.
Absolutely.
Well, on that note, that's our deep dive into the world of self-regulation assessment. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for having me. It was a great discussion.